Hey everyone, my name is Hannah. So starting off for the discussion board this time. Um, as far as the first question regarding grading and how it can be kind of unpleasant sometimes, um, trying to work grades and the grading process into my classroom is I believe is like super important. So how I want to try to work grades and the grading process into my classroom is I really want to try to involve my students as much as possible. And so, I think it would be really interesting at points throughout the semester to have some time for students to self reflect on the work that they've been doing. This would probably be more appropriate for like a third grade or above level, but I think it would be a really interesting activity to give students the time to really look over their work and look at the rubric that, like, how we would analyze their work and see what kind of improvements that they see could be made to make their work stronger. And to kind of get into that mindset of, thinking critically about like the work that they are producing. I also think it would be interesting to implement some times where students are grading other students' work. I do realize that, sometimes in that kind of situation, that it can be a little embarrassing for other students if they maybe don't do as well. So I think it'd be really important to only do grading other students' work in more of a low stress, low impact assignment. But I do think it's really interesting to be able to broaden a student's horizon and have them be able to look at other samples of work and get those ideas of like what kind of work is out there in all the different levels. So, and then I also think grades. I do think there needs to be a pretty good emphasis on grades in the classroom. Um, Not so much as you were working for the grade, but to really emphasize that grades are more of a way of tracking their achievement and like what they're understanding. And so, like, not to worry about like what other students' grades are, but really to try and beat themselves. And so, like, be like, oh hey, like on the last assignment we did, you got a +8. Next time let's try to work for a +10. And to really just emphasize that, grades aren't everything, and that sometimes putting in that effort is really the most important part of the puzzle. So I do think that there needs to be a degree of transparency with our students about like how the grading process is and like why we are implementing the grades. And so I do think that we really need to show our students like how we're grading and what kind of grades like we are giving them. So I do think that grades need to be an integral part of the classroom, but they don't need to be the most emphasized part of the classroom. Um, as far as keeping students informed, as far as like what I would like to do as of right now is I would really love to, after each unit with a student, to sit down and be able to have like just like a 3 to 4 minute sorry, like a 3 to 4 minute like check-in conference with them, because I think it's really interesting sometimes with students that like if they can just sit down and kind of vocalize like, I actually really did understand this concept, or yeah, like I'm getting the formula, but I don't really understand the why. Like I think it's really important to be able to sit down with a student and be able to hear them out and hear what they're saying and to understand like, okay, like this is how I'm noticing your achievement, but how are you noticing your achievement? Like are you not getting the why and getting the how to do it? Or are you not getting the how to do it but you understand the why? And using like that check-in conference to kind of determine what kind of work that we need to do in order to get not only their grades up but also their understanding up. Um, and then as far as it like monitoring achievement and recording grades during the grading period, I do think that like again I'm kind of thinking in more of an upper grades, so like third through fifth kind of mindset. But like I do think it would be a good idea to kind of help like give students a way to track their grades and to kind of have them do like maybe a little graph for each subject of like, oh, okay, like, on our last like weekly assignment for daily work, like, I got like this, like a, like a +8, and, then I got a +10 and a +12. And so like I'm doing a lot better, and they see that visual representation of like how they are doing, but then also so they can notice those patterns of maybe like when they aren't doing so well, so that maybe we can try to understand more of the relationship of like, okay, well, this one week when you weren't doing so well, what was going on? What can we do to make sure that we don't have a repeat of that week? So I think it'd be really interesting to kind of incorporate that idea of like charting and keeping track of grades. And then maybe on like more of a second, first kindergarten level of, sitting down with them and being like, hey, like you had of like assigning like a simple system of being like, okay, like last week, you had a 1 sticker week, and this week we got up to 2 stickers, like, you know like what do you think made last week different from this week? And kind of interpreting grades as more of like a symbolism instead of like incorporating like that math and more of that like charting like data aspect into it. um, and I do think it is important to be really transparent with the student and to keep a file of their work that's accessible for them if they want to view it, so that then like they're able to monitor their achievement and look back at like what they did well, but then also use looking back at what they did well as an idea for how they can improve in the future. But then I also think it's important for them to be able to have that file to be able to look back on and to understand of like hey, so these are how my different grades are looking, just so that they can keep aware and keep on top of that. But then also so that potentially we could share with like a parent or something about like how their student's progress is going. And then like it sounds maybe a little too like bleeding heart, but I do think effort needs to have a good amount of weight like in how our students are doing. I do believe that achievement is important because we want them to understand the concepts, but I think that it's really important to acknowledge and give weight to the effort that they're putting in. Because some students it's just not going to come easy, and so, they're working hard and they're putting in that time, but sometimes it just doesn't click. And so I think it's really important to give some kind of weight in each assignment to the aspect of effort. So even just like having a personal rating scale at the end of being like, how hard do you think that you worked on this assignment? Like what quality of work do you believe that you put in? And having kind of an honesty scale to be able to have them rate themselves, and then have us chime in and be like, you know what, I noticed you putting in a lot of work. I agree with the score that you gave yourself. Like, you definitely deserve the full 10 points awarded for effort on this assignment. But then also using it as a way to start a conversation of, hey, you know what, you gave yourself a 10, but I saw you goofing off in class a lot. So, like, I think that, maybe you don't exactly deserve a 10, but you did put in the work, so we're going to give you a 6. But how can we turn that 6 into a 10? What kind of behaviors do we need to stop, or do we need to do more of in order for you to get that 10? And then good or bad behavior, again, actually going back, I don't know if I exactly addressed the knowledge aspect of in grading, because I do believe that, knowledge does need to have more of a weight, because the knowledge aspect is what we are going to be testing on, and that we need to ensure that our students have before we can, like, with a good conscience, pass them on to the next grade. So I think that, that definitely needs to be a larger part of the grade, and it needs to be acknowledged. It needs to be, like, greatly acknowledged but I do think it's easier to forget that idea of effort. And then as far as good or bad behavior affecting grading, I definitely believe there is a correlation between bad behavior and like worse grades. Just simply because sometimes that bad behavior like prohibits a student from reaching their full potential of attention span and participation. Because in a classroom, like the biggest like bad behavior that is like witnessed is usually off task, like off task behaviors, like talking to a neighbor or playing with a fidget spinner or like different items such as that. So like I definitely believe that bad behavior like needs to have like an effect on the maybe not like the individual assignment grade, but it needs to be a factor in the final grade. So, like at the end of each quarter, have like your final conference before, quarter grades go out and be like, hey, you know what? So one of the things on that I consider in your report card is behavior. So how do you think your behavior was this semester? Or, sorry, I'm thinking college. How was your behavior this quarter? And just kind of getting their input on how they did, and then just really being honest with them and being like, you know what? Like, every week, like, we do discuss behavior and we have like a behavior chart and a behavior reflection. And I've noticed that, like, maybe your behavior hasn't been quite up to par. And so, like, I'm not going to give you the full, like, 4 on your report card. I'm probably going to give you more like a 2 or 3, but that's definitely something that you can come back from. And, like, I just want this to be more of a learning experience of that, I know you can do better than that, and that I know you can have, like, better behavior in class. And I can't wait to see that good behavior that I know you're capable of. And then as far as good behavior, I think good behavior needs to be rewarded too by, getting that higher grade maybe in a behavior section on the report card. Because, as teachers, we're not only teaching our students, like, hard knowledge and foundational knowledge, but we're also helping to socialize them so that they're going to be like equipped and ready to go on to middle school and high school and be able to interact with that outside world. And so, having them learn that, it's not okay to interrupt, and, being rude to people, like, is going to affect, like, your performance and, like, what kind of evaluations you're going to be getting out in the real world. So, like, I think, rewarding students for having good behavior and getting that higher grade, like, on their report card is going to be really monumental in, like, helping reinforce that good behavior and reinforcing the behaviors that we want our students to carry on, not only outside the classroom, but also in, like, as they move through the school system. And then as far as, like, classroom norms, power relationships, and teacher awareness affecting the implementation of a lesson plan, I think it's really, like, all of these aspects are very important and can really have can have a big effect on how that plan is going to go over. Because, being aware of the dynamics of your classroom and what's really, like, the normal standard is going to affect how you are going to implement that lesson and how it's going to occur. And so knowing, like, okay, so, like, usually for class, we switch stations every 20 minutes. But for this lesson, we're going to have to sit still for an hour. And knowing that, like, my students may not be used to that. Maybe I need to incorporate a couple get up and move breaks. Just so that, because they're used to switching stations and getting that time to move. And then I think that will help to decrease any behavior disruptions during the lesson. Or even just, like, norms, like, when you're, like, usually in the classroom that, like, you have certain people sitting by other certain people, but then, like, for this lesson, they're required to get up and move and talk to other people. Like, how is that going to affect them? Are they going to be a little more rowdy at first? Do you need to start off by doing a practice round to be able to show them your expectations for what you want throughout this lesson? So it's just going to affect like some different aspects that you may add into the lesson or that you may need to potentially take away. And then as far as power relationships, it's always really interesting to see the kind of dynamics that form within a classroom because, like they seem so small and there's like little children, but sometimes like the different relationships they form can really affect the entire atmosphere of a classroom. And so it's important to acknowledge those different relationships and understand that that maybe some students may not like being separated, and learning how are you going to deal with like when you want to split them up, of being like, okay, just explaining to them of, okay, I understand you like working together, but I really need you to participate in this special role because I think you two are some really good leaders in this classroom, and I really need you to take charge in these different separate groups, and I think you're going to really be able to contribute a lot. And so understanding those different relationships and understanding how like if you need to separate them or if you're going to put them together, of like, understanding like the best way to deal with them in any like negative lashback, but then being able to spin it in a very positive way. But even thinking of power relationships and relationships of just students who work really well together, but then just wanting to help them to branch out and learn how to work well with even more people and expanding their network within the classroom. And so just understanding that sometimes those students who do work really well together, that sometimes you may need to break them up just to see like how they interact and how they work with other students. And as far as teacher awareness, that's just like something that all teachers need to be aware of what's going on in their classroom. And so just, while implementing the lesson, of making sure that like we're being aware of like how are our students acting? Is anybody acting out of turn? Is anybody, causing a distraction and, stealing the attention from the actual lesson and the content towards themselves? And like, how do you want to deal with that? And, is there a system already in place? And being aware of like, if someone, like, this is a really like serious, intense lesson, like if somebody has to go to the bathroom, do I need them interrupting, or do I want to have them use a hand signal instead? And just being aware of just some of the different aspects of like what's going to affect the lesson, and like, is it going to interrupt the flow? How is it going to affect how everything is going? And just being aware of like some different factors that are gonna that could potentially like cause a hitch in that lesson. Like I did a lesson where that involved paint with first graders, and honestly, like looking back in hindsight's 2020, I should have been more aware of like how like in first grade students' motor skills aren't fully developed, and so I should have been more prepared for the likelihood of paint going everywhere, And so yeah, I brought trash bags for them to wear, and I bought washable paint, but was I prepared for the possibility of like, getting paint on the desks and washing out the paint brushes and how we were going to do that without causing a huge mess? Yes, I should have thought of those different possibilities, and like how the different supplies we were using could potentially make a lesson harder, and how those students might affect those new supplies, or how those students might be affected by those new supplies. So it's just kind of being aware and like, trying to think out all the different possibilities of what could potentially happen, and then like how you want to deal with anything that bad that could potentially happen, and how you can spin it and use it in the most productive way possible. I hope all of that made sense. Talking through it, I always tend to maybe ramble a little bit, but I do think grading is a really important aspect of teaching, and I think it helps keep students accountable and it keeps them informed, which is a super important aspect of education, of self-monitoring, and I think it really helps to build that intrinsic that intrinsic motivation to want to do well. But I hope you guys all have a great night.